I am Gary Johnson, candidate for President of the United States. Hope to be the Libertarian nominee. I happen to think that the country is in really deep trouble. I believe that we're going to experience a collapse unless we bring our spending under control. So I'm making three promises as President of the United States. One is to submit a balanced budget to Congress in the year 2013. That's not promising to balance the budget, that's promising to submit a balanced budget. Secondly, I promise to veto any legislation where expenses exceed revenue, believing that with those two promises, spending will be less than any other scenario that you could possibly come up with. Lastly, I am promising to advocate on the part of throwing out the entire federal tax system. That would be the income tax, that would be corporate tax, that would be withholdings from your payroll check, that would be the IRS, and replace it with a consumption tax, the fair tax in particular. I think the fair tax will reboot the American economy for the next 100 years, that it ends up being cost neutral. So it's really the answer when it comes to making our exports 23% more competitive. And it's really the answer when it comes to jobs, when you consider that a zero corporate tax rate would do just that. President Obama 2 weeks ago talked about reducing the corporate tax rate from 35% to 28%, believing that that would create jobs. Well, what if we take that to zero? I'd also just like to take this opportunity to point out that the ACLU about 5 weeks ago came out with a report card on all of the presidential candidates. I think there's kind of two prongs to running for president. One is being fiscally conservative. The other is watching out for civil liberties. So the ACLU about 5 weeks ago came out with a report card on all the presidential candidates. The ACLU is a group that's dedicated to civil liberties. It is a group that's dedicated to the Constitution. To the first 10 amendments of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. But in their report, 24 liberty torches was a perfect score. Rick Santorum and Mitt Romney got 0 liberty torches out of 24. Newt Gingrich got 4 liberty torches out of 24. President Obama got 16 liberty torches out of 24. Ron Paul got 18 liberty torches out of 24. And I got 21 liberty torches out of 24. I think that the message that I am talking about is similar to that of Ron Paul's. I don't think Ron Paul is going to win the nomination for president. So I hope to be able to carry that message forward, that message being liberty, freedom, that message being fiscal responsibility. A pie-in-the-sky scenario for me running as a Libertarian candidate for president is to potentially poll at 15% against Romney and Obama, believing that Romney will be the nominee. And if that's the case, being on the national debate stage during the presidential debates for the general election. I think that if that happens, anything is possible. And currently, I am polling at 9% against Obama and Romney. I don't know if it's my name as significant as it is any third name that appears, but right now, given that 80% of Americans say they would consider voting for a third-party candidate, I think that these days are very unique and that the problems we face are so daunting and not being addressed by either of the two major parties. I think that'll do it.
All right. I have a couple questions.
Yes.
I won't dwell on Representative Paul, but you left the Republican Party, and if you had stayed, would you do you think you would have met the same fate as Mr. Paul and given away the Republican Party?
Well, you know, talking about communication 101, I think when people hear the same message from a couple of different sources, that the message resonates a little bit better, that there's a better understanding of what the message is. So I think Dr. Paul is often malaligned with what it is that he's saying. It needs to be more than just him. And by the way, it's more than just me also. I think it's millions that have given the opportunity would be the messenger for a liberty, freedom, fiscal conservative agenda. I don't see him winning the nomination, and so potentially I do see this as changing the world a little bit. Where does that Ron Paul support go when he ends up not winning the nomination, which I don't think he is going to?
I don't personally pretend to remember every Libertarian nominee, although
I don't either. I don't have it. I don't have it.
I remember that, at least the first one, because he was a philosophy professor at the university I went to. But I believe, other than Representative Paul, you are the only one that has had executive experience in elective office. It just seems to be that.
Yes, it is. Yes.
And that experience, as much as my client, has been very varied. I think you vetoed 200 bills one session.
One session I voted.
You made our governor looks like who had earned the moniker Dr. No. You make him look far surpass him.
Well, that was my experience, and it was something that I promised. New Mexico is a state that's 2-to-1 Democrat. So having made a name for myself vetoing perhaps more legislation than the other 49 governors in the country combined, I think it's remarkable that I got reelected in a state that's 2-to-1 Democrat as a Republican. Now, I'm going to argue that I got to serve as I'm going to argue that I got to serve as Libertarian governor of New Mexico for 8 years under the guise of being a Republican.
Let me turn to your proposal to submit a balanced budget.
Yes.
How would you deal with the twin problems of military spending and entitlements, for lack of a better?
Well, with the exception of myself, there's going to be nobody on stage that's going to be talking about gun rights and gay rights in the same sentence. There's nobody on stage other than myself that's going to be talking about slashing military spending and so slashing warfare spending and slashing welfare spending. So the big three when it comes to spending reduction, and my balanced budget is a 43% reduction in federal spending. So that's a $1.4 trillion a year reduction in federal spending. The big ones being Medicaid and Medicare. I oversaw the reform of Medicaid in New Mexico. We took it from a fee-for-service model to a managed care model. We set up better health care networks, and we saved hundreds of millions of dollars. At the time, I believe if the federal government were to have block granted the state of New Mexico 43% less money, done away with all the strings and the mandates associated with how to deliver health care to the poor, that I effectively could have seen the delivery of health care to the poor with that much less money, again, with no strings. I think the same model could apply to Medicare also. Medicare is of course health care to those over 65, federal program, but it's a fee-for-service model nationally. Just changing that to a managed care model would save significant dollars, but I believe if the federal government would have block granted the state of New Mexico 43% less money than what they were currently spending on Medicare, health care to those over 65, that I effectively could have seen the delivery of health care to those over 65. People fall out of their chair when they hear about a 43% reduction in Medicare, but I think we need to put this in context of we either cut Medicare by 43% and live within our means, or we find ourselves with no health care system at all. We find ourselves with a collapsed nation. We find ourselves with a collapsed currency, which is going to be the outcome of continuing to spend this much more money than what we're bringing in. From a military standpoint, I start with the premise that we can, that we should, that we have an obligation to provide a strong national defense for this country. Defense being the operative word as opposed to offense and as opposed to nation building. So a 43% reduction in military spending only takes us back to the year 2003, and a 43% reduction in military spending would be the footprint that the military footprint that we currently have in the world, and that would be all of the military bases that we have, those troops that we have stationed in Europe, Japan, South Korea. It would be extricating ourselves from the current current engagements that we are in, the military presence that we have. So Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, getting out of those situations, reducing nuclear warheads from 2,300 to 500, military in uniform, the civilian staff that supports that, intelligence and research and development. It's cutting back all of those areas, believing that we can provide ourselves with a strong national defense, and also believing that the biggest threat to our national security is the fact that we're spending so much by printing and borrowing money so far beyond our ability to repay. Statistically, we are only 6 to 8 years behind Greece.
I won't leave it on that note. I'll give you one more question.
Ask me about building the fence across the border.
Well, certainly in the neighboring state, they have a very different attitude towards things. I'm not going to get into all these cross comparisons, but I guess one question of interest would be how would you deal with immigration?
Well, I would not build a fence. That would be a terrible waste of money. And I would start with the premise that immigration is really a good thing, and that we should make it as easy as possible for someone that wants to come into this country and work to get a work visa. Not a green card, not citizenship, but a work visa. I think for the 11 million that are here in this country right now, that we set up a grace period where we can get them a work visa. In my opinion, that would entail a background check and a Social Security card so that applicable taxes would get paid. If we implement the fair tax, taxes will not be an issue, because whether you're legal, illegal, a visitor to this country, or a U.S. citizen, consumption tax is going to be unavoidable. And then lastly, border violence with Mexico. This is a prohibition phenomenon. So legalizing marijuana, in my opinion, would reduce border violence by about 75%. And when we legalize marijuana in this country, and I do say when because 50% of Americans now support the notion, but when we legalize marijuana, I think as a nation, we're going to take giant steps toward rational drug policy, which starts with looking at drugs first as a health issue rather than a criminal justice issue. Would immigrants stand in line if the line was moving to get a work visa as opposed to crossing illegally? I maintain that they would stand in line if the line was moving.
How do you get to be that third person on the stage when, certainly in recent American history, it's very difficult to be that third person?
It's very difficult. I pointed that out in my pie in the sky scenario. Have to poll at 15% to be on that debate stage, but given today, that I think is a very real possibility. 80% of Americans suggesting that they would consider voting for a third-party candidate. That number has never been so high. And I think this comes with a backdrop of people recognizing that the two parties, Democrats, Republican, it doesn't really matter which one's in office. We continue to do the same things. We continue to not address problems that, in my opinion, are going to result in the collapse of this country.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.